You look weary. Come closer. I am the teller. Tales of wonder. Tales of light and dark. There are all manner of stories here. So come, sit by the fire. Let me tell you a story.
A fable. Once, in a land far from our own, across a distant gulf of space and time, there was a great chasm that split this world in two. The distance between both sides was vast and untraversable. Generations of people had spent their lives attempting to cross it, as tales and myths had long since been told of the riches of the land on the other side. One man, born of the highest house in the land, longed to cross the chasm. He was raised to believe there was one true hero, one man worthy of the journey from this side to the next. Once he became a man, he made his decision to begin the journey. The citadel in which he lived was some 10 years' journey from the chasm. He set off from the citadel, accompanied by a group of slaves provided to him by his father. As he left, his father spoke to him. He told his son that these men and women under his servitude were not like him. They were born of the same spirit, yet they did not harbor the same character that he did. They were mere tools to utilize on his journey. He could use and dispose of them at his discretion. The young man looked upon the slaves, and though he saw faces that looked much like his own, and some that didn't, he saw them exactly as his father had described. Not as beings, not as men, but as objects for use and disposal. He accepted this as absolute truth, and set off out on his path, with neither a thought or nagging feeling that anything he had been told could be wrong. The journey was long and arduous. The young man of the high house and his band of slaves encountered beasts and creatures long thought consigned to myth and legend only. They fought and survived sieges by war bands and communities of marauders. Throughout their journey and whatever challenges they faced, the young man of the high house never hesitated to sacrifice any of his party. If one took ill or fell to injury, they were left to perish alone in the woods or at the heights of great mountains. If a beast foul and hungry could be bargained with, they were his currency. For they were not of his house. Therefore they held no value other than what they could be used for to further the journey across the great chasm. While his party saw that they were nothing to the young man of the high house, they could only pray that those that survived the journey would be rewarded for their diligent service and sacrifices made along the way. 10 long years passed, and the man and the last of his party, 2 men, 2 women, and 2 children from each pair, arrived at the chasm. It was as vast and insurmountable as the legends had told. The man led his party along the chasm, searching for some means, some way across this great distance. Close to giving up, the young man of the high house stumbled upon a great tree. It reached high up into the sky, higher than any man could see. Producing his axe, the man set about chopping it down. But before he could, the tree spoke to the man.
Do not resort to violence, my friend. I am more than willing to utilize myself as means for travel for those who are righteous.
The man laughed. The prophecy speaks of but one who is worthy. I believe that to be me. The tree bristled as it processed this information.
You have 2 paths. I will fall and allow you to walk across my body to the greener lands. It will take not a year to cross, but you will walk this path alone and live in this land alone. Or Take the axe in your hand and work my body with your fellow companions, to fashion a bridge so that all may pass across the great chasm. It would take years, almost all of your remaining, but in turn you will allow access to a better world for all,
the tree said. The man did not think for longer than a second. Fall now, tree, grant me passage to the new world. The tree bristled.
As you wish.
The tree cracked at its base and fell from the sky, crashing down across the mist-strewn chasm. The man returned to his group and took all remaining supplies. No thanks were given, no warm conciliations. The young man of the high house simply tossed the group his axe. Perhaps you may use it on yourselves for fuel and sustenance. The young man of the high house returned to the tree and took his first steps to freedom. The man walked alone for a year, and as he finally crossed the chasm into a land untouched by pestilence and greed, the tree lifted itself up and disappeared back over the other side of the chasm. The young man of the high house looked around this new land. It was both bountiful and beautiful in equal measure. Clear streams of crystal cool water, plant life, fruits and vegetables in constant bloom and growth. Creatures of peace and virility roamed freely. Yet as the man went about exploring this new world, it felt blurred and textureless. The water lukewarm and cloudy. The food like ash in his mouth. Even the sun, high in the sky and beating down, felt cold on his skin. The man grew weary but could find no rest. He returned to the chasm and shouted across, desperate for the tree to hear him. But the tree could not hear him, for the tree was currently being broken down and reassembled into a bridge by the young man of the high house's team of travelers. They had galvanized nearby communities into helping, and every day that passed, the world's inhabitants set aside their differences to help. From across the chasm, the man watched as those he left behind worked in joint force traversing the chasm. He watched for 80 years on the other side of that chasm as the world he left behind rose together as one, edging ever closer until they finally arrived. As their feet hit the ground of the greener land, the young man of the high house had already breathed his last. A statue at the end of their world, a warning to those who would ever consider tainting this new land with self-interest and selfish cruelty. The man turned to stone as the bridge before him swung in the gentle breeze. The route of passage only for the righteous one, the one righteous people. The shortest walk is the longest. It was Catherine's wedding day. It was on a Sunday, which had always been her favourite day of the week. It was the one day where there was no responsibility, no schedules to keep, no meetings to attend, no social calls to make. It had always been a day just for her. Yet as she prepared to walk down the aisle, she realised she had just released this day, the day that it was always just for her, to someone else, to her soon-to-be husband David. Granted, their anniversary wouldn't always fall on the same day. It would only be every 7 years. But that meant on average over the next 30 years there would be at least 4 Sundays that would be dedicated to not just her, but her and David. Well, so what? 4 Sundays in 30 years? That was nothing. Barely a speck in the total Sundays in that 30-year period. Yet as her sisters tended to her hair, and Catherine looked in the mirror, she could not put this thought out of her mind, because it wasn't just one Sunday every 7 years she was giving up. It was her entire life as an individual. Her life up until half an hour's time, was her own. Her own to do with what she pleased. She could go anywhere and do anything she wanted, beholden to no one. But isn't that what she wanted? Catherine looked at her face in the mirror. She was only in her early 30s, a mere 33-year-old woman. A few lines had begun to appear on her face. But those weren't a sign of age and impending mortality, Catherine thought as she observed them. They were the facial equivalent to stamps in the passport of her life. There was the slight scar on her right cheek which she had gotten from a sharp twig protruding from that tree she climbed in Mallorca when she was 19 on her first girls' holiday. There were the slight freckles around her nose and under her eyes that only revealed themselves in the hot summer months, like small stemless flowers blossoming in the light of a new season. She was still young. She still had it. So why was she sitting here, in a wedding dress that felt more like a straitjacket? Why was she consigning herself to a life she had always vehemently denied she wanted, to others and even herself? Well, that was simple, Catherine thought. Because she loved David. David wasn't a manly man, nor was he a sensitive pushover. He was just a man, a dependable, reliable, slightly quiet until he had 3 pints or was watching a Bruce Willis film, man. He was the owner and proprietor of a small yet successful joinery company. He was a good man. They had met 3 years ago when Catherine hired David's company to make a dining room table for her parents' 30th anniversary. They spoke at length over the phone about the designs. They got on like a house on fire. Conversation was just easy. It flowed like water. It wasn't long before they went on their first date. They even had their first meal together on the table for her parents in David's workshop after the restaurant they were supposed to go to suffered a fire an hour before they arrived. David made them his self-proclaimed speciality, salmon en croûte. Unfortunately, it ended up burnt because they were too distracted doing shots. It was Catherine's favourite dinner ever. Cold, burnt salmon en croûte with a touch of tequila. They fell quickly. Quick and hard. Catherine had always wanted to keep things casual, but frankly, she liked it. Falling in love. Being in love. She loved meeting him after work, watching small bits of sawdust fall from his clothes and hair. She loved telling him about all the ridiculous lists she had to write for the online magazine she worked for. She loved that she didn't have to hide anything or pretend about things. She was herself always. Nothing sacrificed for him or to him. Not that he had ever asked or expected anything like that. David was like a calm ocean. Neither a ripple or wave ever disturbed his surface. Maybe that's why Catherine was having her doubts. As her bridesmaids collected the trail of her dress and she made her way down the winding staircase of the grand hotel, she wondered, shouldn't love be passionate and contemptuous? Shouldn't it be hard sometimes? Shouldn't there be contentious and bitter arguments that end with either a blistering fight and admissions of truth, or falling into each other's arms in tears? It wasn't like that with David. Any disagreements they ever had always ended calmly and methodically. David didn't like tension or confrontation, so he took every disagreement in a broken down and logical manner, like he was reverse engineering a table or a bookcase he had built. He would examine the points of the argument or problem, see why they had fit in those particular ways and shapes, and then come to an agreement. It wasn't like Catherine was any different. Her family had always been one for airing out all issues in the open. Nothing was ever left to fester. So what was it? Why, as her feet carried her to the door to the wedding service, did Catherine feel so terrified and uncertain of this path ahead? Was it all the times before she had thought that perhaps this was the time, the one? There was Gareth, her college boyfriend. Sure, that was only a year-long affair in their final year of college, but she had honestly envisioned a long and happy life with him. They took MDMA and went to secret forest raves. They watched esoteric art films at 2 a.m. in the back garden under a makeshift blanket tent. They had travelled across Europe on their summer holiday. In essence, they as a couple had had far more new and exciting experiences together than she and David ever had. The doors opened and Catherine was greeted with a room full of her friends and family. At the end of the classically decorated reception room stood David. He looked a little awkward in his suit. He was much more accustomed to his polo work shirt and baggy tool shorts. But when they locked eyes, his face dropped the tense lines of stress and washed into a large smile of pure unfiltered joy. Catherine smiled back at him, while her stomach dropped. What was she doing? She couldn't do this. As she took her father's arm and began walking towards the aisle, she avoided the gaze of her soon-to-be husband and the legions of smiles that carried her up the path. Her mind turned back to Matthew, her boyfriend in Berlin, to Samantha, her girlfriend when she worked in South America whilst teaching, of Peter and Lucy, the two other members of that poorly thought-out 2-month triangle in Portsmouth. Every single drunken kiss, steamy one-night affair, Tinder hookup, weekend getaway, experimental online orgy flashed through her mind like machine gun fire of past experiences. Everything she had ever done and everything she ever could do raced past her closed eyes as they slipped away with the next decision she would make. She stopped walking. She felt her father's levered hands pat hers and his dry lips brush her cheek as he passed her hand to another. Hey. Catherine opened her eyes fully, prepared to ruin every single person in that room's day and at least one person's life. But as they opened and she saw David, a solitary tear trailing down his cheek like a tiny river, Catherine knew. She knew she had made the right decision. Because despite everything she was giving up, despite all the millions of things that can be done in the world, and how many are lost when committing to someone else, she was gaining a million new ones. A home that doesn't change every 6 months. Someone to eat dinner with and cuddle up on the sofa with every night. An ear to listen and a shoulder to cry on at the drop of a hat. A confidant, a partner in crime, a number one fan. A person just for her. Catherine took a deep breath and she smiled as her eyes opened, a flood of tears. Hey, she said. David gripped her hands tightly as his voice quivered and shook. I'm so sorry. I can't do this. Catherine laughed. She didn't feel quite so guilty now.